Welcome to Before They Change the World, where we explore the minds, ideas, and dreams of exceptional students working on inspiring projects before they change the world. This episode is hosted by me, David, and I speak with Max, who's a CS master student at ETH and the co-founder of Sid. Sid enables generative AI companies to leverage their users' personal context seamlessly. You can think of it a bit like Stripe for data. Max and his team have recently received the amazing news that they're attending the next Y Combinator batch, and I couldn't be more excited for them. In the conversation, you'll notice that Max is talking about a different product in the same space, and the reason for this is that when I originally spoke with Max, it was back in January 2023, and at that point, Sid Search was a B2C startup redefining personal data search by creating an ultimate personal digital assistant. This conversation, however, captures Sid in its earliest stages, before their first pivot or even applying to YC. But Max's insights and passion remain timeless. All right, here's Max.
If I have to say where it started, it was probably, I think, 2 years ago. Actually, Lotte, one of the co-founders, she was sitting in a lecture and the professor was talking about, Google's TPU architecture and what it does, right? And how back then it was still an order of magnitude improvement on that. And I think the comment was, this crunches a lot of your data, right? But you don't know what it's doing, but it's probably making a lot of money for Google. And I think that's really where her inspiration with this whole thing started a few years ago. Was really this idea, hey, what actually could you do if you had access to everything, right? If anything that ever existed about you or in your network or that you can even think about, right? If you could just find it, retrieve it, and then operate on it. And then I think, right, we set out to somehow make that vision a reality, that you can really harness the value that's hidden in your own data. And then that was the idea, right? That's where we started. And then I think it started first with the alpha product, which is really all around search, right? And for us, right, the core insight, and this is a bit more my background, right? I have a bit more time with LLMs, right? I've been playing with GPT-3 for a much longer time, right? And what you can really see is that it's incredibly good at looking at unstructured data, right? And we've had ways of processing structured data for a while. If something is a nice table, you can probably train a very nice model on it. But LLMs really allow you to, or LLMs, large language models like GPT-3, really allow you to dig deep into unstructured data, into PDFs, emails, right, where there's no real structure. And so for first, it was important for us to see, hey, can we use that technology to really make sense of just one person's environment? And we chose email and your personal files, including the cloud. Your cloud files really as this first unit. Where we explored, right, okay, what can we do here? And I think the results are really, really good, right? We can more or less, find and retrieve anything. And classically, right, if you, for example, use Spotlight search, it's all keyword-based, right? If you remember the file name, you can find it. If you remember the email subject line, you can find it, right? Yeah. But you can't ask a general question, right? You can't ask, hey, okay, right, I remember there was something like this, I sent you an article about this topic. I don't know if it was a Bloomberg article, Economist article, or Substack newsletter. I don't really remember, but I know it's roughly about this topic, right? And here you can just enter it, and you find it, and then you can retrieve it. Yeah. And I think the second step for us is making this a bit more conversational, right? I mean, here we're really using the capability of LLMs to understand memory, right, and to understand data. And now it's really also about synthesizing from that, right? So from your emails, right, you have a very particular email style, as everyone does. And I think one of the core limitations, right, of, for example, something like ChatGPT is just that it's too generic, right? You can give it some twist, right, and you can iterate over something, but really, if you get an email from someone you communicate with regularly, it's obvious that this wasn't written by the person, right? But it was written by ChatGPT. And what we can do is, right, we can synthesize, hey, this is your personal writing style. And then we can generate things in that style. And that's really where you can see the power of this memory, the power of your personal context really feeding into there. Where it goes from, something that's a very nice gimmick and technically, of course, incredibly impressive. I think, even we were surprised just how well ChatGPT felt. Also, knowing how comparatively, bad answers from GPT-3 can be, just to see that improvement there. It's still not something that's really a product. It's still something that's really individual or personalized or useful to you. And for us, this is, we see this a lot as a just also in a different way of interacting with your device, right? Currently, it's a lot of, hey, I have something in this app, something in this app, right? Then I have a folder structure over that, right? I have 18 different search bars to find my information, right? And then I need to do a lot of the synthesis myself, right? You know, maybe I find the right document, but then I need to find the right section, right? I can't just ask a question, right? Mm-hmm. And this is, for example, also something that you know was one of these core use cases, right? And this is one of the first things we also built was, or I built back even before we did this as part of Sid, was having a question, being able to question a script. So there is one oral exam, right, that I had, I think, a few years back. It was on virtual reality, and more or less everything that could be on the exam was in the script. And then there was also a lot of old exams, right, you know, from the people at FIS who provide those to us and all questions. And then, you know, I more or less, I thought, hey, you know, why don't I try this, right? And it was incredible because you could ask the script questions, right? You could ask textbook questions, and, you know, I started asking the questions from the old exams, right? And while I don't think it would have gotten a 6 back then, right? It would have definitely passed, right? And with flying colors. And I think it really shows, right? This is a much more natural way of actually interacting with something. Like I have a question and then, you know, give me the answer by search, right? Yeah. And I think, right, this really goes back to, you can take all of these, you know, different windows and different things, and you can just compress it into a single a single bar, a single conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think just from a modeling perspective, right, we always come back to Jarvis from Iron Man, right, and also just how search and iteration works there, right. I don't know if you remember the scene, you know, where he's about to discover a new element, right? And then he goes, okay, you know, give me the model. Okay, now remove the trees. Now remove that, right? No, let's have a look at that. You know, condense it here. And quite frankly, right, this is something that you can, or that we can do with this, right? You can get the initial search result, the initial information that no, I wasn't talking about this. You know, give me that, right? And you can iterate to a solution there. Yeah. And then, you know, and other parts, right? This is something that makes what you can exist, you know, what you can do at the moment much faster, right? And then you have the other section of things that you really couldn't do before. And for us, one of these things was, for example, you know, we had an issue with signing our Mac app. It turned out to be something incredibly stupid, but as it mostly is, or as it often is, right? But we were working on it, right? And we just, you know, we couldn't find a solution, and it of course means that we can't ship an app, right? So it's an incredible roadblock. And then, you know, what we can do is, right, we go over your LinkedIn contacts, right? We scrape those, and those are incredibly ugly answers you get just right from there, right? Yeah. But with the tech, you can write incredibly nice summaries, and then you can of course search them, right? And so what we could do is, hey, do we know anyone, right, who's worked on macOS development before, right, who maybe has an engineering degree that could help, right? And then you just get a list of people that can help you there, right? And that's something that otherwise, you know, you have to start calling around, you know, you have to like, hey, do you know anyone that knows anyone, right? And like this, you know, usually our networks, you know, all the people we've written emails to, all the people we have on LinkedIn is much larger than, you know, the network that we can remember in our heads. And you can really do that in an incredibly quick and incredibly automated way. And this is something that, you know, otherwise would have taken ages, right? And now you've, again, compressed that down to just a single question into this.
Yeah. So I want to unpack some of the things that you mentioned. So there's like the first step, I guess, is where you search semantically. So your query has some kind of meaning, and it's written in natural language. And then what you return are snippets of existing content that just match that query semantically, but you haven't modified that information. The second step would be, I guess, to aggregate that information and then spit out like a ChatGPT-ish response that is like very specific to your question. And then the third thing you were saying, using a similar model or search bar, not only for retrieving information, but for generating information and performing actions.
Exactly.
Right.
And for us, the alpha was really doing that first step, right? And also going into the second step. So we already do, you know, we look at the answer at the documents, and then we run a model on it to then answer your questions, right? That was the alpha product. And now it really goes into using also the generative features there, right? And I think just from a scale perspective, this you know, personal data, this is always, you know, it sounds incredibly buzzwordy, right? But it's become an actual problem, right? So what you have is, right, if you compare non-public data, right, to public data. So public data is everything that's freely accessible on the web. Then there's just been an incredible divergence, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure on the exact figures, right, but I think it's growing. Non-public data is growing 21% a year, and it has been for the last 25 years. Right?
In terms of volume, you mean?
In terms of volume,
Oh.
and that's everything from the stuff you have in your devices, right, to something that an enterprise has, right, and it's just absolutely eclipsed the size of the public web.
Yeah.
And it's just not even comparable anymore, right? And on an individual basis, you can also see that, right? You go from 10 years, you'd had email and the files on your device, right, and maybe a Dropbox if you're really tech first in your way of working, right? And now you have at least 5 different cloud services. You have Notion, you have Slack, you have WhatsApp, you have Telegram, right? You run into this multimodal for everything way, and just the data amounts have been absolutely exploding, right? We're just not built for digging through terabytes of data, right? And the classical machine learning models are also not built for working through unstructured data, right? And all of this non-public information, most of it is completely unstructured, right? And now really we have this technology that for the first time really allows us to unlock the value that's in there, right? And really be able to ask questions in that direction, to really synthesize it, and to really understand who you are, and then ask incredibly interesting questions about what you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, because when you just said that, I realized that there's been such a crazy amount of investment and competition in the public search domain, like with Google and so many other search engines. But when it comes to like searching your file system, it's pretty much like the operating system search engine that does the work for you.
Yeah, if you know the file name, right? It's perfect, right?
But you can't do anything nearly as complex as what Google allows you to do when you're searching for something, or what ChatGPT allows you to do with public information right now. Yeah. And I'm wondering, so right now your focus is on doing these different operations on textual data in like emails, other applications, etc. But it's all textual for now, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, in theory, right? I think text is the basis that we have at the moment, right? We could, what we already do is some OCR, right? So if you have screenshots, then for example, those are also become searchable. What we don't yet have, for example, is something like Clip, where you could get a description of an image from the image, right, and make that searchable. But again, right, this is something that we can build on top, right, if the people using our product want it. Yeah. And absolutely, back to the public search example, I think, right, and this is also why it's code red at Google, right, and this was rumored back in December, right, and now we can see it, right, with Sundar authoring the BART press release. It's, right, the big issue is the public web is by definition public, right? And now we have an incredibly powerful tool that allows us to search through information. And for information like the web, which is pretty structured, right, in comparison to what you else have, this task becomes trivial, right? This used to be an incredibly difficult challenge, right? And Google was the only ones who could really master it. But now, you have ChatGPT, which provides very good performance. And, it's quite obvious that if you gave ChatGPT the ability to scrape the web, right, and to get up-to-date information, then you could build a Google-grade product, right? Probably even a better than Google-grade product. And then you also have, for example, Claude from Anthropic AI, which just got an investment of $300 million from Google, nonetheless, right? And then you have Palm, which is an open source model, right? And you have a lot of different models that now are very, very close to providing Google-grade information, right, for public data. And I think, if you project this out over the next 1 or 2 years, right, there's probably going to be a dozen different models that can do this for you, right? And there's already a few different companies. There's you.com, right, which does this kind of search. There's Niva.ai, right, which does this kind of search.
The one of Kevin's system for news?
Yeah.
Have you heard of that?
Yeah, exactly.
What's the name?
Right.
Artifacts, right?
Yeah, no, exactly, right. And this really shows, right, and the problem is the technology exists, right, and everyone seems to have the technology. It's just a question of, how much training data do you have and how much compute can you buy, right? And what it means is that Google effectively turns into a commodity product for search, right? And this is, of course, incredibly concerning for them. The lion's share of their revenues and the lion's share of their profits still come from search, right? Because you can serve 5 ads with a single query, right? And a query is very, very easy to process.
And now search is also very, very inexpensive right now.
Yeah, exactly, right? And now you go into a paradigm where searching just on a compute side will cost at least 100x, right? You'll have to go from 5 ads to 1 per query, right? Because the interface doesn't really lend itself to it, right? It's not like, you can ask, what's the fastest what's the fastest animal, what's the fastest mammal in the sea, right? And it's like, oh yeah, it's the dolphin, right? Do you want to buy a dolphin, stuffed toy, right? And it's this, and it swims at 37 miles per hour, right? And adding ads into there just feels absolutely bizarre, right? And while I'm sure the smart people at Google and the other companies will find a way, right? We're going to go from 5 or 6 ads per result to probably 1, right? And I think we're almost saturated on how many queries we can actually ask to the internet. So, and again, right? So what we see is, what's the differentiator? The technology, the models exist, right? And seemingly everyone has them. And the problem is the data is by definition public, right? It's the public web. So really, there's no way for you to compete and to have a differentiator. And the only difference what you can have is, hey, you can search things that others can't search, right? Or your data set is so much larger than everyone else's, right, that your search is just that much better. But and this is, of course, 2 things which are incredibly difficult to do, and none of the players here have it, right? And not OpenAI and not Google, right? And not the others, Niva and you.com. And this is right, and this makes it incredibly hard, right, to look at the space and see how that actually becomes a non-commodity, non-low margin space. And so I think, right, the big focus will be around searching things that others can't, which is what we do, or it will be around, right, really having a data set, right, that no one else has access to. And I think these are the 2 ways. We know which one we've chosen, right? But I think this is the real one, right? And it's still right,
So one question I have about the private search domain is how do you, and maybe this gets into very low level stuff, but how do you actually get that information from the user if it's scattered around many different apps and sources that in some cases might not really make it easy to share the information that is stored in their servers with a third-party app? So how do you get around this?
I think, right, there's 3 levels of hardness with building these integrations. The first level of hardness is they offer an API, right? And this is luckily what most apps do. So we can just programmatically access them, right? Even, for example, WhatsApp or Telegram, right? Slack anyway, right? You can just programmatically access it. You might have to log in, right? And give it tokens, but that works. Also Gmail, right? Gmail was, I think Gmail was incredibly easy integration to build. Or I don't know, I didn't build it, but right? I think we built the Gmail integration in a day, right? And that's the first one, right? This is the first bucket of things you can really, which are very, very easy for us to get. I think the second one, those are the ones that make it a bit more difficult, right? And those are ones that don't really offer an API, right? But they're exposed through the browser, right? So most apps that we use today, right, have at least a browser version or are browser native. And so example, Notion, right? They also have an API, right? But they are also on the browser, or something like Jira or Linear, right? Which is a lot of things that people work with, they're on the browser, right? And as soon as something's on the browser, we can also capture it. That's actually also what we've built already in the alpha is a Chrome extension which can do just that, right?
You can just scrape a website.
Exactly, which is the second one, right? If they don't know play nice, this is what we can. this is the second bigger gun, and just the browser extension is of course also nice, right? Because you build an easy integration into a lot of things, right? And exactly this, which is a super common use case, is hey, I read something, I heard something, right? I generally remember what the topic is, and now I want to send it to you because I think it's interesting to you, or because you asked for it, right? And now you can just write. You can collect that, and if you've ever looked at it in a browser, you can find it and send it. Right? And then the third one, right? If they really don't want to play nice with either of the first two, then you can go through more hacky methods. I don't know if you know Rewind, right? Which go over screenshots and screen recordings, right? There's a lot of other ways where you can then find an entry in. And if that then even fails, right? Which it shouldn't, or it can't, right? Because if you can't see it, then anyone can, right? You could also just send a GDPR request on your graph and get the data that way, right? And they have to supply it to you by law. Okay. But of course, we don't want to. That's not the path we want to go there. And I think currently, and this is really the path for the integrations. And what we can see, right, also in the example before, what you really get into is, the more of these integrations you have, right, the better the use case becomes. And the more data points you have, the better the use case becomes. So you have somewhat, data and effects built into that. If I just have your emails, right, I can extract your email writing style, right? I know how you would respond to certain requests, right? I can extract all of that. But then, right, if I also have your calendar, then I can not just respond to the email in your style, right? But I can, if it's, asking for a time, right, I can automatically feed that in there, right? I already know when you're online, or I can go the other way, you're on vacation or you're go on a trip somewhere, and then you have, 5 or 6 meetings during that time, right? You can automatically send emails to the organizers of those meetings, telling them that you'll be remote during that time, right? And something like this, which is also something which is tedious work, right, moves completely away. And that's not possible if you just have email, right? For example, as Google does, or if you just have access to the calendar, as another company has. And right, and then you add something like the LinkedIn part, right, around it, where you can really look at, hey, who do I know? And then it's like, hey, right, I have this problem. I need someone who has experience, right, in this specific area. You get a list, and then you're like, okay, draft an email, with slots next week, right? And now you've just had, 5 or 10 outbound emails for a critical issue of yours, right? And you have it automatically written in your style, right? You can even personalize it to the individual person, right? That's absolutely possible. And then it adds in, what calendar availabilities you have, right? And you can see that growing that, right, really also the capabilities grow to an incredible amount. And you can really look at a very, very platform perspective, right? Because once you have all of this, you can think about, can take any workflow that you have, right? And you can just shorten that and optimize it, right? And then we can do the same, right? We can talk to users, right? And we can see, oh, right, hey, this is something that they do a lot, right? We can also do this, of course, analytically, right? But this is a kind of workflow that happens a lot. Let's find a way to really condense that down even further, right? And we can do that because, of course, we already have the platform, right? And we have the LLMs that allow us to, make sense of that in between. And that's really, I think, where then a lot of the really, really interesting stuff comes down the line.
Yeah, so initially when I heard about it, I thought it was mostly limited to search, but it seems now like you're trying to build the ultimate assistant for people.
Yeah, I think right, the way we phrase it, and this might be a bit of a funny way to say things, right? But ChatGPT, to a certain degree, feels like everyone's a manager now of an intern called ChatGPT, right? And you can offload some work to it, right? You can say, hey, write this, draft this, or remove the fluff from that, or hey, what was this again, right? What are 3 points that I might have to watch out there, right? You can ask those sorts of questions, and it's excellent at it, but the problem is really, it doesn't know you, right? You always have to give it the context of what it has, right? And you don't know when the intern's wrong, right? It might just bullshit you, right? And then it loves doing that, right? And so, right, by adding us as a memory layer next to it, right, what we can do is it automatically and instantly has the full picture, right? It knows everything, right? And every query and every answer that it provides, right, is given the personal context, right, to fit just right. And this is, right, what the search product was to validate, that this kind of data layer can work. And then in the second part, right, you also know where it's getting the information from, right? For every answer, you get citations like you'd want them to, right? Where you can say, hey, let me check actually that's true, right? And over time, right, this is also how you build trust into these models, right? If I've checked 10 times, right, and it was always right, then I'm not going to check the 11th time.
Right? So just a question on the technical side, like, is it that, I'm going to give a very bad example, but just to make it clearer to the listener as well, like, is the approach, which I doubt, but maybe, to basically take all the context of the information and basically aggregate that into the prompt of the user? Or is it to like train or fine-tune a model based on the context and then give it like new prompts?
So the prompt engineering, right, that's, I think, the trivial solution. It's actually, right, it's unreasonably effective, if I may say so. And this is true, right? And then the second part, what you'd be talking about, would be explicit fine-tuning, right? This would be explicit fine-tuning maybe on a different stack, right? That you have a fine-tuned model that just answers computer science questions for you, or a fine-tuned model that just answers, business questions for you, or something like that. And that's definitely also something that's interesting. But that, of course, requires a lot of compute, right? Also, if you were to fine-tune the model just on your personal context, right, that would mean hundreds of dollars per user in compute, which is, of course, infeasible, right, in a consumer-facing product. So what we can actually do is we take the information, the context, right, the embeddings, which we retrieve of the context information, and we bias the weights inside the model. So we bias the weights inside the model with the information. So this acts, and the model itself is frozen, which is very important. But effectively, you get a fine-tuned model for every query that you want to ask. Okay. Right? You get a fine-tuned query on the information relevant to that query for every model, but you can do it without actually needing to recompute the whole thing.
Oh wow!
Right, and this is where you can get into these really, really interesting things, right? Where you really have that interplay between Sid, between the language models, which are the computer, right, and then you have the memory, which is effectively which is what we provide.
The next thing I wanted to talk about, which you kind of touched on, is like who is the ideal customer for this, and what is your business model?
So the ideal customer is I think, or our first customer is definitely founders, right? We can do, and founders not at the early stage, not when you have 3 or 4 people, right? Because then usually, communication is still very tight, right? There's not that much to manage in a sense. But where we really saw this problem exploding was for people in org sizes 20, 25, 30 people. And I think they spend an hour to 2 hours, right, just retrieving information. They have the next meeting, right? And sure, the meeting notes are somewhere, right? And from the last one. And then there's also some communication because they also want to do a reach out there, right? Yeah. And just retrieving all of that, right, in front of your next meeting is for example, one of the cases we saw, right? And as I think, right, they spend around an hour to 2 hours a day just on finding things. And because they're not large enough, right, to have the formal processes, right? The infrastructure or the formal processes, right? Oh, this has to go into this and this, right? And the management system, right? And this is how the stuff is updated. They don't have personal assistants. Yeah, they don't have personal assistants, right? They don't have a setup forecast and review call, right? And specified formats. None of this, right? It's okay, we just hired, 5 or 8 more people, right? And now there's, texting going on everywhere. Some people are using this, some people are using that, right? Yeah. There's no. And
we just switched platforms. Like our to-do platform is now a new place, and we have some old notes somewhere else. And
but the engineering team still likes their engineering platform, and this is really where the explosion starts, right? And really, from a focus perspective, we need to go to the user, right? That's the highest expectation user, right? The user that will use us the most, right? The user that will get the most value out of this. And that's the ideal first customer to have, right? And this is the one we've found. It's also an incredibly nice initial customer to have because they're very well networked, right? They know each other. If it works for one, it'll work for the others. And of course, it's also where our personal network is strong. And so this is, of course, right, why it's a very, very nice match.
I mean, you'll be your own customer at some point if you start growing.
No, exactly, right? And this is the first step. And on the business model side, I think initially it's just a simple subscription, right? I think further on, right, also as the product suite evolves and we go more into a cloud first era, right, where you actually store the data with us as well, so you can get things like you can access everything on your phone, right? And when you move more into that, right, then you need to get a bit more complex on the pricing side, right? But in general, it's going to be subscription based, right? It's not, we're not in the business of selling ads, right? This is not what we want to do, right? We're a product, right? We're incredibly useful, and that's how we want to be seen, right? And that's what we do.
So you had like this initial epiphany, right, in a lecture hall, or Lotte who's one of your co-founders. How has the team evolved since then, and how much time have you been working on like this product?
Lotte was the one also that brought us all together from that perspective, right? It was her idea back then to really rethink what's possible there, and right, and I think then I think we met spring last year, right? And she had met Georgis and she'd worked with Tim before, so she's known him for a bit longer, right? And then she got all of us together, and then we had a look at this, right? And I came more from the LLM side, right? And Tim, who was at Husky, right, came with that perspective. He worked at Start. I don't know if you know it's I think the largest student-run startup conference in Europe or something like that. I don't know, some superlative, but very cool. Right? It's in March.
Okay.
So. And he used to work there also alongside Lotte. And then there's of course Georges, right, who's also ETHCS, right, and he did the MIT exchange a few years back, right, and he's just and he's also worked at an AI startup before. Yeah, and he's just an insane programmer, right? Yeah. I mean, of course I'd consider myself to be one of the better ones, right? But it's not a comparison, right? It's exactly right. So the Gmail integration was built in less than a day, right? Which is just which is the kind of engineering pace, right, we really want to have, and because of course it also allows us to iterate quicker, right, and to really try out new features, right, and also going into the planning process for the next 6 months, a lot of it goes into how what architecture allows us to move most quickly, right? Yeah. What allows us to have an idea and then build the feature in the least amount of time, right? And for us, that time scale is days, not weeks, and definitely not months or quarters, right? And this is how we got together, right? And then I think we did a workcation in Iceland, right? Where we also to test the team a bit, right? We had all known each other, for a bit, right? Yeah. But we were in a cabin. I think the next supermarket was an hour away, right? Oh. And you can really see, how well the team works together, and it was excellent. And then
so when was this, last summer or?
This was then end of last summer, right?
And for how long were you guys in that cabin?
I think we were 7-8 days, something like that.
Wow.
We went out sometimes, right? Okay. Now Iceland is also a beautiful country, right? Yeah. So definitely worth a visit on its own. But right? We went there and then we tried it out, and that was really the kickoff. And then and that's how it got started, right? And then we built the alpha very, very quickly, and also really started talking with users and started talking with people. All right, for a time we thought that. So for example, consultants and investment bankers are also an incredibly interesting target from the simple perspective, right? They have usually quite short time frames to work on a deal or a project, right? Yeah. And the project starts off with getting some data dump from a client, right? So they usually get the hundreds of gigabytes. Maybe it's well structured, right? Maybe the client just put everything in there, but it's your job to search through it and then find the right number to plug into your model if you're investment banking, right? Or to find the right information, right? To then do the strategy slide on the consultants, right? And this is something, right? Which usually, and actually for them, a large part of a new project start is search, right? Is discovery, is asking questions, asking the right questions, and this is of course also a tool, right? Where we are very, very useful. But right, and just doing that, also talking to those, right? And then we ended up going with founders because we think it's an even stronger fit, right? And just going through that exploration, right, in parallel. And then really for us, it's been also, of course, I mean, beautiful to see ChatGPT then launch in December. I mean, we couldn't have timed it any better, to be very honest. And before then, if you're talking with people, it was always like, is this technically possible, right? That was the question. And of course, we were totally convinced it was technically possible, right? Because then we could also show it, right, at some point. But more or less after ChatGPT was released, everyone was like, okay, yeah, sure, this is technically possible.
Yeah. And by them, I guess the most relevant here is the investors.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Investors, customers, right? Yeah. I mean, we started talking to customers way before we had a product to show them, right? Or even a demo video.
Yeah, they can really imagine.
So yeah, exactly, right. And then people, to some degree, they feel like folders and file naming conventions, that's the way it has to be, right? And they're so entrenched in this that this is also something that we have to work with, and we can't just say throw away all of your nomenclature, because people have they love it so much. But what you then realize is that it's of course totally irrelevant. Right?
It's gonna be like a mono folder setup in the future. Like you just create a file.
I think it's just downloads. Yeah, it's just the downloads folder, right? And it's just absolutely. I think that's exactly how it works, right? Okay. You have because that's how the internet works, right? Yeah, no one goes around, I don't have to sort the internet to use it, right? No. I don't have to be like, I'll save that, right? And I'll structure that and have a tree hierarchy somewhere. No, right? No. I just I ask the question, I get the answer, right? And now we can do that. We can offer that the first time for an individual's data as well, right?
I feel like that's such a powerful analogy to tell people, like, if they're like, oh, but yeah, like if you want them to realize why this model is gonna work, just tell them about the internet. Like, why are there folders on the internet, folders of websites? Like,
exactly. Ooh, was this in the news folder, or was this in the sports folder?
Exactly.
No, you just get the answer, right? And quite frankly, the technology is so powerful that offering Google will be so easy, right? This is also something we'll absolutely offer, right? I mean, we already offer it with the power of the models that we use currently, right? But I'm absolutely sure, when in a year we'll see models that can also, query the internet, right? We can just plug that in, which is super nice for us, right?
So a question on the backbone of your technology, because when you're talking about large language models for a startup, I assume that it's not like, oh, we're just training something from scratch. You're always building on pre-trained models or stuff that's somewhere out there. How do you handle that when the field is moving so incredibly fast?
So, right, for us it's important to see, right? I'm not going into the business of competing against ChatGPT and competing against Bard and Ask Bing or whatever they end up calling it, right? This is totally uninteresting to us, right? We're actually model agnostic, right? So we have some ones which run on custom open source models. We have some versions which run on OpenAI ChatGPT, right? And these models, right? We're incredibly agnostic, right? What we can do is we can go to any of these models, right? And we can just plug in the context, right? And we just plug in the information, right? And turn it from an intern who knows nothing about you, right? And who gets things wrong, you don't know when they get something wrong, to someone who knows how you're out, who knows you're available, who knows who you know, right? And who can dig through any document you've ever saved on your computer, and this is what we can do, and that's the experience we provide for anyone, right? We see it as effectively as one layer below where the LLM sits. Really cool. Because the space is moving so quickly, and for us, it's great, right? Because it improves the features of our product without us doing any work, which is always the favorite kind of feature improvement to get.
Exactly. I wanted to talk about the space of generative AI, just a kind of a futuristic outlook as well there, because we were talking about how the internet is not, or like it's you don't have to sort it, but at some point, like I can imagine that content is going to become so commoditized and so overwhelming because a lot of it is also going to be generated that do you even think we'll want to get a list of search results at some point, or is it?
No. I don't. No. And this is right. This is the alpha. In the beta, there won't be it won't be around a list of search results, right? And that goes back to it, right? I mean, you can, if you want the historical perspective, right? You can read this, and this was the founding reason behind Palantir, right? And this came out of the PayPal founding story. Was right. PayPal was faced with a lot of fraud, right? And they found out that humans were usually quite good at identifying the fraud if they saw it. Machines were not that good at identifying the fraud when they saw it, but the machines could dig through terabytes, right, of data, right? And then they could, find the cases that they thought were more suspicious, and then a human could be at the end, right, and say, hey, this works and this doesn't work, right? So the machine, it was good when the machine was smart, but the machine didn't need to be human level to be actually useful, right? And this is very similar here, right? You want the machine to do as much of the synthesis work as you want, right? And then it's just high-level inputs from you, right? Just like with the Jarvis example, right? You don't want to do all of the manual work, right? You want to say, okay, give me this, right? Edit this, and maybe add that there, right? And remove that. And this is really how we should be interacting, right? You give the high-level intelligence and guidance, right? And then the LLMs with Sid, right? Dig through all the rest, and dig through the terabytes. And absolutely, I don't think search is the classical search way is the best way to do it, right? Because also just from a user perspective, right? Usually you arrive with a question, right? You arrive with a question, you want to know something, and now, okay, right? I answer the question, right? And then you get 10 results as in Google, right? And then you have to go to the website, and then you have to find the part of the website which answers your question, right? And that's 3 degrees, right? And an unnecessary 1 minute step, right? And if you just get the answer at the very front, right? You ask the question, you get the answer. That's what you want. And we're going to see a lot of interface innovation as well, right? Currently, we talked a lot about retrieving, right, and getting information out of there. But of course, it's a two-way street, right? And we talked about before, right, how you could have a draft an email, personalize an email, right, in your style to the recipient, right, and with the right context, right? And also, you know, for example, if you're approaching someone around a problem, right, you know, just add a summary of the problem as well, right? And this is something that sounds completely ludicrous, right? But it is now absolutely, you know, just a feature in a much larger product suite. And then of course, right, currently you'd still have to copy it out, right, and put it into mail. But of course, that's an arbitrary next step. You just hey, send it out, right? And if you don't have the email address, then send it out over WhatsApp, right? Rewrite the message as a text message, right, and send it over that. And really, right, you not just become the interface for pulling information out, but really to interact and put it in as well, right? And also, you know, from a node perspective, currently, you know, you'd find the right position to put it in the Notion, but quite frankly, what you just want is you open a page, right, and then you just send it into the bucket, right, send it into the mega folder, right, and then you retrieve it whenever you want to, and you get the information out of it, right, and I think that's going to completely reshape also how we think about the devices, because quite frankly, right, currently, you know, and that's why we all have expensive laptops. It's because they're just so much more useful still than the phone, right, for doing actual productivity work, or even than an iPad, right? But if most of your interaction is just, you know, with the single bar, right, and in a chatty style, right, that experience is equivalent on the phone, on the iPad, on the computer. And you know, if you think, you know, maybe one step further, right, it's also the same on the Apple Watch, right? And just thinking, right, about the fact that you could have a watch that's potentially very close to as useful as your laptop is, right? It's absolutely insane. For example, you know, the article example you had there, you're sitting, you know, with a coffee with a friend, you're like, hey, you know, I read this super interesting thing, right? Maybe exactly, right, what Sundar wrote on Bard, right? And it's like, hey, I want to send this to you, right? Now you can just ask that question over the watch, right? And it automatically finds the article and just sends it to you. And I mean, this is something that's absolutely ludicrous, right? Currently, you know, you'd be like, fuck, right? Where did I save it somewhere? You know, history, right? And then you try to find it, and then, but if you don't remember what publication it was from, it's already incredibly difficult, right? And you really, and this is where the struggle starts, right? And now this is a workflow that you can just, you know, go there, right? And if it's another workflow that you have, right, that's common, you know, you can more or less automate all of these if you have the LLMs that do the thinking, right? And then you have the memory and you have access to the underlying data, right? And
So a question. So this is something I've been thinking for a bit. Like, imagine what you were just saying about the generative feature that also is able to like send out content to somebody else. Imagine this in like 5 years or something where it becomes like really commoditized and a lot of people are using this. How do you think this will, because like there has to be a response to that, right? Like if everyone is sending content out like at the speed of thought, then you're also going to become way more overloaded with emails that have been generated by an AI or text messages or everything. Do you think there's going to be like a receiving assistant, basically?
Yeah, of course.
Like, is it going to turn into an API, basically? Like,
yeah, of course. This is also something, right? Also, one of the pain points, right, we saw was this. You know, you wake up in the morning, right, and then you look at the group chat, right, and it's like 80 new messages, and you're like, now I have to sift through all of them, right? And you know, usually if it's just, you know, some group chat, some student group chat, you just ignore it, right? But if it's your engineering team, then you have to look through it. And then now, you know, that also goes like, hey, just summarize those messages from yesterday, right? And then give me the key breakdowns. And the summarization features have also become insane, right? And then you can ask also questions like, hey, were there any issues that concerned me, right? That concerned my product, right?
Or like all these recruiting emails, like find the companies that I actually care about, like, or that match my profile, or and of course you have a receiving end there, right? It's okay, right? You synthesize it down, you break it down into the blocks that you need to make a decision, right? And it always, you know, that's, and I think we'll see an explosion, of course, on both sides. But usually what that means is that you also just increase the amount of communication, increase the amount of, you know, contact, and increase the amount of information that's being shared, right? And that's usually always a very, very good thing for society. And same goes, right, also for the context here, right? A lot of the use cases we talked about here, right? There are things that, you know,
all of us have to do, right? But they're not things where, or a lot of these things, right, are not things where your contribution is incredibly important, right? It's, you have to take something, right? You have to do something, you have to enter it, and then it's, writing an email. Or for example, writing an email to administrators and stuff like that, right? This is something, you need to do it, it needs to be formal, right? It needs to have all the right words, right? To make it a formal email. But quite frankly, right, there's no value add to your time.
Just the transformation of information.
Yeah, exactly.
But like the content is.
There's no value add to your time, right? And so much every day is just things that you have to do, right? But actually where there's no value add to your time, right? And in the classical world, you'd hire a few assistants to do it, right? But quite frankly, right, exactly, everyone can have that intern now, right? And everyone can have that, right? And everyone can have the most personal, most informed intern that ever existed, right? And you can really break down so much time. And for me, what I think is super interesting is how will a society look where most of these, I'd call them, stupid tasks, right, can just be fully automated, right? How, just how much time that frees up to actually do the stuff that you're interested in, right? And where it's your talent, where it's your insight, where it's your creativity that makes the difference, right? And this is what's really exciting, right? And then.
That's super cool. So we've spoken about Sid Search, we've talked a bit about the team, also about semantic search and generative AI. I want to ask some questions about your experience in running a startup, in starting one, and also in fundraising. I know we can't get into the details of that, but still I'd be interested to know like some general lessons that you've had there, or thoughts about the fundraising space in these times, and specifically in the space that you're in. Yeah, so things like what's your approach for finding investors and things like that?
Okay, so first of all, I think on the starting side, right, there's of course, right, always a breakpoint where you feel like, hey, this is so compelling and this is so interesting, right, and you don't really want to work on anything else, right, and that's usually where it starts, and then the internal audit has to start. Is this because I just don't like working on the other thing as much, or is it because I actually think this is a thing, right? And for me, this is very much that, right? I wouldn't be interested in building an incremental, I think it was also mentioned, I wouldn't be interested in building an incremental B2B SaaS company, right, that takes an existing, so accounting process, right, exactly, right, or looks at some compliance or some accounting process or some procurement, there's a lot of different, processes and companies, and a lot of these aren't well digitalized, and you can of course take any of these, turn it into a startup, right, and sell it well, very predictable cycles, right, and you can raise a lot, you can raise funds, right, and et cetera, right, but when you really look back on it, right, you've provided an incremental efficiency benefit and not really, built anything that's transformational, that really changes, how people go about their lives, or what is even possible, right? And for me, right, the last companies that have really managed that scale have been, something on the order of Google, something on the order of Facebook, right? The idea of, what we today take for granted but what before Facebook really didn't exist was, if I wanted to talk to anyone, right, or if I wanted to connect to anyone on the planet, right, it was just, opening a website and pressing a button, right? And that just absolutely didn't exist before, right? And then for Google, it was the same thing, right? We had this huge repository of data, right, and of information, but it was just inaccessible, right? And I think, right, this is also one of our mantras. If something can't be found, right, it can't be used, right? There's no value in information that can't be retrieved. And right, and I think since then we've really slipped into this, hey, right, I'm building an incremental product, right? No one has really thought about bringing anything of that scale back, right? And also with language models, I think language models are an internet-sized technology. I think they're going to be incredibly transformational, but the space still does not have a Google-sized product, right? I mean, OpenAI's goal is not to become a dominant player. I mean, it's their explicit strategy that they want multiple competing models, right? None of the other models have had any breakout success, right? And nor do I think that it will be, right? The scaling laws are quite cemented. It's how much compute and how much data you have. None of these deformed model providers have more than 3 or 6 months had a lead over the others, right? And the simple reason is it's only, right, the three things that determine model performance: the amount of data, the amount of compute, and the number of parameters, right? And the number of parameters, of course, intricately linked to the compute and the data that that you have, right? And it's more a function of the two. So it really breaks down to, hey, you have compute and data, right? And no one has a data advantage, right? Everyone has the internet, which is what all of these models are trained on. But none of them has something that the others don't, right? I'm sure, right, there's some model that's maybe also trained on this other obscure website that the others don't have, but there's no real differentiation here, right? And also on the compute side, right, OpenAI, of course, has a lot of compute through their partnership with Microsoft. Google, of course, also has a lot of compute, right? But there's none of them have an advantage where you'd say, okay, right, this is unsurmountable for the others, right? So I really think we're going on the model end into this more of this infrastructure layer, right? Which is what we also saw with the internet, right? None of the protocol providers of the internet actually, made money with that, right? And none of them did, right? It's not the creators of HTML, not the creators of TCP/IP, right? These are all the standards that the others operated on, right? And it wasn't the makers of the tools. Exactly, the tools that came on, right? But it was the application layer above, right? It was, hey, how could you actually provide a service that uses these things to be useful, right? And I think we're going to go into that direction quite strongly there as well. We're going to see, hey, this is a technology that will go into any product that you have, right? I think PowerPoint, right, and this is also something that we tried, right? You can feed an article into PowerPoint, right, and you can feed an article into ChatGPT, right, and say, hey, give me 3 bullet points, right, or on this, and then it'll extract 3 bullet points, right? You need to be quite clever with how you construct a prompt for them to be really good, right? But this is a tool that absolutely will come into any product, right? It'll come into email as a writing assistant. It'll come into all of these, right? And every vertical will find a way to really, to implement that feature, right? And what they, of course, don't get, right? And this is what we're hinting at is they don't get the network effects, right? If you only have email, right, that really limits how much you can do. If you only have calendar, that limits so much what you can do. If you only have the Notion, if you only have one of these. And really, right, you need the most complete picture because whoever has the most complete picture will be able to offer the best services on top of that. And that's ultimately what it comes down to, right?
So there's this incentive to build like for verticals that have a clear playbook is that investors know that there's a high likelihood it's going to work and they can get a quick buck from it. So you're in like the more challenging, I guess, B2C and like a more fundamental paradigm shift technology that could take longer to develop. So what is the pushback or what is the difficulty of doing that?
Look, right, I think much like difficulties, of course, right, just the size of the vision, right? If this goes right, I think, I'm absolutely convinced, right, this is a Google-sized opportunity, right? And someone will make it happen. And right, but of course, right, it's you take up much more risk, right? Doing something that in the B2B space, right, or even an incremental space, right, that's almost risk-free, right? And if you're talking about startups and risk-free, then you're probably doing something wrong, right? And I think currently the issue is, right, none of the investors have much experience in the space, right? There's only very, very few really, really talented people. And they, I think a lot of them just don't know what a winning company looks like, right? They just, right, they have no framework to think about this. They don't know, hey, what will be the differentiator, right? I think, for example, one of these things that's incredibly hyped, right? If you read on LinkedIn or Twitter, or, even there is this, RLHF, reinforcement learning from human feedback, right, as somehow a way to improve the model and et cetera, right? And to me, this is important, right? But this is table stakes, right? This is not where you differentiate your product, right? Everyone will have to use this, or everyone will use this. But I don't think you can actually build a differentiable, sustainably advantaged company just on the basis of that, right? And I think that's a huge issue that we'll see is that really a lot of the investors and I think also a lot of the startups don't yet know, right, what will actual market power look like and what will actual technological power look like in the space. But for us, it's important, right, to really have someone that will allow us to move away, right, and to bet the company multiple times, right? And we think we need to, right, to actually arrive at the end of that end of that path, right? If we build an incredibly, for example, right, the LinkedIn infrastructure part, right, being able to ask questions to your network, right, in a completely asynchronous way. That in itself, right, this is something that might be very, very interesting or very, very valuable, right? But and right, we could do this for our niche, right? We could do it for founders and then maybe expand from there. But for us, right, if it ends up that this is the entire product that we sell, right, we want to get to that larger vision, right? And we will happily, a very, very nicely, even a nicely profitable business on that sense, right, to pursue that larger degree, right? And I think we'll need to go through a few of these transformations, right, to really get there, right, where we first of all change out who our customer is, right, and then change out what the product looks like and change out the economics of the product. This is also why I mentioned Sequoia. They're incredibly good at doing that, right? I mean, one of my favorite examples here is NVIDIA, right? They invested in NVIDIA, although apparently Jensen completely botched the pitch, but he came on such a high recommendation that they still invested in early NVIDIA. And then NVIDIA really went through a few absolute transformations, right, in what they do and what they provide, right? And their latest transformation was going from a gaming company to an AI company, right? And there was a lot of years where that felt like an absolutely stupid thing, right? He was pouring money, right, insane amount of resources into CUDA, right, which was this development platform for sciences, right? But they were making good money on graphics cards, and it wasn't growing massively, right? But that in itself would have been a very nice business, right? But Jensen Huang, right, then said, hey, no, right, we're going to bet this entire company, and at this point, right, a $100 billion business, and we're going to bet it all on AI, right, and that direction. And it's paid off handsomely, right? All of the development happens on NVIDIA GPUs, right? And I mean, one of the biggest accelerators behind the space will be, what will the H100 performance actually look like, right? And just to think that it depends so much on the output of a single company is crazy, right? Yeah. And this is not the first time that NVIDIA has done this, right? I can recommend the Acquired podcast. They have a very long, they're a 3-4 hour podcast, and they have a really long episode on really looking at the NVIDIA example, right? And how they bet the company again and again, right? Yeah. And Sequoia sat on their board for 25 years, and they were absolutely still during all of that process, right? They were absolutely, Jensen was at the front there and saying, hey, we're just going to, we're going to go to the casino, we're going to bet it all on red, right? Yeah. And they just sat there and said, yes, we trust you.
We'll watch you.
And I think that takes an incredible confidence, right? Yeah. And that takes, of course, an incredible amount of trust, right? And also on the other end, right, it takes an incredible amount of skill, right? And also it's an incredible pressure, of course, on the founder to actually perform alongside that. Yeah. But no, then, right, I think that's absolutely the partner you want to have if you really want to build something that's enduring, right? That's someone who will sit at that board table and say, okay, right, we trust you. And then also, right, Sequoia does not shy away from replacing you if they don't think you're up to the job, right? Which is probably also fine, right? If you, right, effectively, right, what it requires to be really, really good at startups, right, changes through every stage of the company, right? And what you usually have, right, is someone who's really, really good at the early stage is usually much less good at the growth stage, right? And then even worse, right, as soon as it's somewhat a mature company, right? And either that person makes through that transformation, right, on a personal level as well, or there comes a point, right, where it makes sense to have someone else run the ship, right? Yeah. And that's usually also in the best interest of the person, right? Because,
they can go on, maybe start another thing or focus on the part that they...
Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, at Facebook, I mean, he maintained the CEO title, Mark Zuckerberg, right? But he delegated, right, most of the stuff he didn't want to do to the COO, so Cheryl, right? And she effectively ran Facebook for the largest part of its history, right? And he went back and he could focus on product, he could focus on the things that he
like
enjoyed,
things that were coming, like Meta.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
That wouldn't have happened if Mark was like bogged down by the everyday business of running Facebook.
Yeah, no. If he had, if he was preparing the shareholder calls, right, and doing the organizational thing, right, and doing the process refinement, absolutely not, right.
What does success look like to you or Sid Search?
I think maybe you've heard it out there, right? I think our goal is to build something that's enduring, right, that actually changes how people interact with anything. interesting. Right? For me, success would look that you could just walk around somewhere and someone opens up their laptop, right, or opens up their iPhone, and the first thing they do is sit, right. It's the first interaction with any device, right. It's how they go about their day, right. And for me, that's the goal, right.
Yeah. Who do you look up to?
A lot of people, I think, right. I mean, there's of course the people you look up to in your personal life, right, who've meant a lot, right, and who've also helped shape you, right, and who you are, right, and also understand your flaws, right? Of which for everyone there are many, and can help keep you in check on there, right? And know when it's your emotions inciting and not who you are. I think on a general perspective, on a business perspective, I think it's maybe I'm not a fan of the idle perspective, right? Because I think some people are excellent at what they do, but they're anything but a chill person to be with. Yeah, I think that's perhaps, I'm not so sure. I have a concrete answer. I more have a list maybe.
Yeah.
But
sure.
yeah.
Sure. And another thing I'm wondering about is how do you see the team continuing in the next few months, given that I think most, if not all of you, are doing some form of studying on the side, right?
Yeah, actually not so much, right? This has come to a natural conclusion, and we're absolutely expanding the team. I think there's a lot of need as well, right? Where we see, right, we're working on functions that are not core to our skill set, right? And where there's also just people that are better at it, right? And I think that's where we really want to expand, right? For us, the main objective is keeping that iteration speed high, right? So anyone that will help us, achieve that, right? Where we can really go from idea to product very, very quickly. And then exactly, right? Hey, we noticed something, right, from our usage. Hey, we want to implement that, and we can improve, right? And that's the most important point.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's all I had. I know you have to go, so we'll keep it to this, but thanks so much. I'm getting excited by what you're going to build, and let's stay in touch.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Awesome.
It was very fun. Thank you so much for having me.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow or subscribe to the show on whatever platform you use. And don't forget to share this podcast with anyone interested in entrepreneurship, university student life, and the rising minds and technologies of the future before they change the world.